All right. Good morning, commissioners, and over to you, Chair Harrington.
All right, welcome to back. We had an executive session to start off our Board of County Commissioners Roundtable earlier. For this day, Thursday, October 3rd, 2024, we have a full complement of county commissioners. We're now on item 2, going through the rolling agenda, roundtable plan, and informational updates. So, rolling agenda. Some things have moved around from the version we had for our roundtable September 12th. I want to reinforce that on the week of October 22nd, we have the annual jail tour. On the 29th, 30th, we have County Council Interviewing Day, and Friday, November 1st, we have the CWS Learning Day. On November, and this is where Ms. Angie is out of upstairs taking care of something staff related right now, so we may need to have one of the ACAs step in. In November, we'll be having 3 meeting days on Tuesdays, plus the CWS Learning Day on the 1st, the roundtable on the 7th, County Council final interviews potentially the 14th, and hopefully working towards a contract. We have the Washington County Annual Housing Forum of the board and the committees on Friday, November 22nd. But the flag I have is, it seems to me from the out of office listings, I'm not sure if we have a quorum on the 19th. Because if I look at the notes section, Commissioner Willie's out, Commissioner Treese is out, Commissioner Fye is out. So I'm not sure how we have a meeting with less than a quorum.
I think there's a mistake that I am going to be in on the 19th and leaving on the 20th.
So that the third bullet, is that a mistake?
At the rolling agenda, it has me out the 20th through the 24th.
Yeah, look at the row above that. On the version that we got.
Yeah, I'm sorry, there's 2. Yeah, the 20th is.
So that third bullet needs to be deleted.
Yes, please.
Okay. So we will have a quorum of 3. Myself, Roy Rogers, and Commissioner Treese. Okay. Then under November 5th in the notes, the first bullet needs to be corrected to August 19, October. See, I'm doing the stupid months again. October 29th and 30th.
Got it.
Beyond that, into December, the executive session may get pushed out into Q1. But we'll see how that process goes. Were there any other highlights or questions from any commissioner on the rolling agenda through the end of the year? Okay. The roundtable plan. Where did I manage to misplace mine? We now have some new information from Ms. Angie and Mr. Munn on the budget that we'll be going through. I have to bring it up on my screen. I tried to highlight changes, but I aligned it with our review from September. So what it reflects, if we start with page 2, because that's current time, we, in the last row, October 3, then we have November 1st, our CWS day. Then under November 7th, I just highlighted where we have Election Day and Veterans Day in both 2024 and 2025. The Housing Forum to make sure it caught everybody's attention. Then in December, we have 3 Tuesdays in 2024. We also have 3 in 2025, which is good news because that spread things out a little bit. And we have the training, our annual discrimination and harassment training set up. Then if we go up to the first page of the roundtable plans, this is then scoping out January onward. So January 2025 and onward. So the first week, nothing startling there. The first week of February, we'll be having both a roundtable day and a CWS day. Then nothing startling. This is all aligned with the calendar that Clerk Moss gave us in September for our meetings. Then in July, I did not note. Yeah, our roundtable will be in March. This is where on my handwritten version, I wrote the NACO DC trip is March 1 through 4. And then in July, there's the NACO annual conference. We may want to change the roundtable date given the NACO annual conference. We still have time to adjust that date, but I wanted to put that out there for everybody. So I could work with Clerk Moss on options and bring that in November. Any other questions or comments with regard to the looking forward? Okay. I don't have any information updates myself until later today. I hope we'll have some information updates on SHS later today. You're meeting at the same time we are. So fingers crossed.
In the November, when you were going over, Chair Harrington, the board agenda, rolling agenda, my outage of the office is tentative for now because I'm wait and see kind of the agenda for AOC. So I will update the board as soon as we find that out if I'm actually out or.
They published the agenda.
Okay. For now, we'll get our heads together and see it.
Yeah, that's
Working
why I
on it,
decided
yeah.
to go the 20th and the 21st.
Okay. Okay.
And on that topic, as we look forward to any voting issues, I can also call in for a vote. So I just want to make sure that I'll be looking at the voting issues. So,
As far as I know,
I don't think,
Voting issues are just the typical, the
Yeah.
budget and the officers.
I don't think we have anything as critical as we had in the past. Some of the bylaw changes that we didn't support. That's what.
Oh, well, you guys might remember, because I don't, from the District 8 meeting, there were some bylaw changes.
But none that we didn't support.
Well,
Yeah, we
That
know how
was-
Yeah.
that's how it went a couple of years ago. We were supportive and then things
And that's-
changed in the meeting.
And
So
that's why I'm saying,
that's all very real time.
and that's why I'm saying I can be available. That's,
Yep. So, yep, onward ho we go. So that's all I have. Next one is budget, so would be 15 minutes early. What would you like us to do?
Chair Harrington, I think if your board would like to move forward, we can. I think that Tanya probably had some prepared statements, but we can catch up with that. And what I will say is this is a continuation and part of the series on budget between now and when you adopt the budget. So if you are ready, we can invite Greg up and get started.
Great. Come on up. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. For the record, my name is Greg Bond. I'm the CFO for the county, and I believe we'll have Steve Kang joining us online. Is that true? Got him online? Okay. Steve's the county's budget manager now. So today, I'm going to pause. Nope. She walks in. She might want to have something to say. We can pause then. But today is the second in a series of 6 or 7 roundtables that we've scheduled. The first one being September, the last one being January, as you know, focusing in on budget. So that's what today is. And here's an overview of today's schedule. So there's really 3 things that we'll talk about, that plan to talk about here. One is just a snapshot of where we are in the roundtable meetings and review of the budget drivers and assumptions, those components that help us start to build the budget moving forward. And that's primarily around assumptions with payroll costs and non-payroll costs and some of our revenue items. And we'll also review at the very end a draft of the budget schedule that has some dates on it. All right, so here's the roundtable schedule. Again, this is just basically a reprint of what you've all seen a number of times. The one change I would say is that for today, we had originally planned on talking about SIP projections, but we need to postpone that until November 7th. We just don't have the numbers yet to be able to talk about that.
is that the numbers from Intel?
Yes, yeah. And at that time, I'll just, as a preview, I'll give you both an estimate of when we know what our this year's numbers are compared to what the budget was. I'm also I'll be able to have some figures on what the SIP roll-off is, those 2 agreements that sunset at the end of this fiscal year, what that impact will be on next fiscal year, and then also an estimate of the value of those assets that are covered under SIP right now that will roll back on the tax rolls and what that'll mean potentially to the county. So need to spend a little bit more time with my friend Joe Nelson to get those numbers together. All right, so jumping into the budget drivers and assumptions, these are pretty basic year to year, talking about some of the major components. There are many other smaller components, but property tax revenue is obviously one of the biggest drivers. It's the largest funding source in our general fund. Personal service costs, those are PERS, COLAs, some of those assumptions, health insurance costs that make up one of our larger components of costs. In fact, in the general fund, I just had to go back and rerun these numbers because I think might have misspoken a couple times in the past, but in the general fund, our personal services costs make up over half of the budget. And if you pull out transfers it makes up 3/4 of the budget. So it's a pretty sizable component. Okay, so jumping into property tax revenue, this is the, so there's a very, very close relation. We talk about assessed value a lot. Assessed value, the growth in assessed value is not a one-to-one relationship with the growth in property tax revenue, but it is very, very close. So it's a good estimate for us to use as we build our revenue our revenue adjustments from year to year. So this, let me jump over and explain the graph, and then we can talk about this year. The graph there to your right shows those vertical blue bars are the actual AV growth from year to year over a 10-year period, including what we're estimating for FY26. The horizontal orange line, I guess it is the average. So you can see what's been happening over the years. The two key pieces I would say to pay attention to here is one is that we're projecting 4.25% at this point moving into the next fiscal year. And that is below average. It's also declining. And I've listed a few of the reasons here underneath why that's going down. And it's primarily due to our friends in the assessor's office look at new permit activity. So as you might remember, our AV is our taxable assessed value is based on two components. One is the 3% maximum amount for existing properties, and then there's new construction on top. So that new construction piece is really what takes us, in this case, generally from 3 to 4.25%. And a couple of years ago in FY24, I think that number was 5.4%. So that number makes a big difference in our revenue projections. The employment market has been unstable, as you know, big news.
Decreasing.
It's decreasing. Mm-hmm. So as new construction declines, so does that amount above the 3%. So there was more new construction coming onto the tax rolls a couple of years ago than there is projected next year. Makes sense. Okay. And I'm going to pause in case Ms. Angie would like to add some opening comments or keep going. Okay. The interest rate environment, things are looking better. They're coming down, so that is good. But it's the effect on the economy is a tail that tends to follow the interest rate activity. So it'll be a while before that reduced cost to borrow money has an influence on investments in the county. And then, of course, we're dealing with inflationary pressures, which are also coming down, but that's going to take a while for that to normalize.
So when you say currently at 3.1%, you're referring to CPI?
I think you're a graph ahead of me. Are you on page 6?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Good question, though. Go ahead and ask it again, and I'll see if I can answer.
Yeah, I will later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so shifting over to costs, one of our major drivers is our cost of employees. It's spend most of our money. And annually, we estimate what the COLA will be, and the COLA ends up being based on a CPI index. It's called CPI-W, which stands for West. And we use a rolling 12-month average number. And I've had a lot of people over the years ask me exactly what that means. So I put together this graph to try to explain that. And you can see, I'm going to use, if you look at January of 23 through December of 23, you'll notice the blue line, which is the actual month-to-month change in that CPI index. And sometimes it goes up and sometimes it goes down. But we use the orange line, which is the rolling 12-month average, which is much more stable. So for this year's budget that we're in now, that number at January or December 23, which was 4.1%, the arrow is indicating that is the amount that was used for our COLA. So looking forward, projecting forward, we think that number right now will be about 2.9%. That's the number we'll use as an assumption for our COLA that will apply to our wage base in the next budget cycle.
Can I ask you a question?
Certainly.
What percentage of your personnel costs are COLA driven and what percentage are step increases?
Percentage of the increase? Is that what you're?
Because I mean, if you say, well, I'm gonna give a 2.9 COLA, but a lot of people are gonna get a step in addition. So do you have what you think that just roughly what the total?
I don't have a rough number, but the COLA would apply across the board, of course.
Yeah.
And depending on,
So we'll
The-
get that,
we'll get that, the longevity of staff on the ladders.
the next roundtable.
It's useful information because if you had everyone going up a step or two, your cost would be 5-6% minimum.
Exactly.
And if you're projecting 4 point something on property taxes, you're in a deficit delta position already. Not counting materials and services.
Great, thank you, good question.
Okay, good question. We'll cover that next time.
What makes, sorry, on the third bullet, proposed budget could include the actual annual change as published in January? What decides if it could or woulda?
So for example, if if the number that we'll take another snapshot of this number, but if it ends up being 2%, 2.9% that we're projecting, and the actual number in January comes in at 3.5, we'll have to rerun those numbers.
Oh, for the average?
Yeah, but if
Got
it
it.
comes in at say 2.8, we probably wouldn't rerun and redistribute those numbers because it's a lot of work for not just the budget office staff, but also staff throughout the county.
Okay.
Good question.
Could you remind me, what was the estimation for last year? Was it 2.9 as well?
4.1.
4.1.
And I think we originally used a 4.2 number early on, and then the actual number became 4.1, which stands to reason if you look at the graph that was declining. Yeah. Okay, on to slide number 7. One of the other major drivers is our PERS rates. And as you might recall, PERS resets the rates every 2 years. And we're coming up on that cycle. So July 1 of 2026 will be a new 2-year rate cycle. The 2-year rate cycle is set based on the performance of the portfolio 18 months prior. So sometimes it's hard to, sometimes if the market is shifting quite a bit, the rates may be going up, but the current market might be going up. And you would say, well, what's the relationship between increase in portfolio value, which is what's in the news now, for example, and costs going up on PERS? It's because it's based on 18 months ago. So the built into the PERS formula, there's an assumed rate of return of 6.9%. The actual rate of return at the end of December of 23 was 4.3%. So when earnings can't support the liability and future pension support, it has to be made up in rates. That's the only 2 places where money comes from, is rates charged to employers and employees, or employers and returns. So it's that hydraulic there. There's also a couple other minor components. There was more payroll than expected. So again, more payroll at that lower rate of return is going to cause a need to raise the rates. And then also for organizations that had side accounts like the county does, that side account often, when the earnings are above the assumed rate, that works to reduce our rate into the future. But if it's below and it's diluted over more payroll, because it's a fixed amount, it causes that dilution to be less. So we have less effect on.
But the
reducing
bottom
rates.
line is, we're given rates. We don't get to choose the rates, right?
That's right.
And the current rate range that we have in this current budget for the current 2-year period is what?
It is about 25%. There's several different rates, but it's about 25 percentage points. So 25% So 25 cents on every dollar goes to PERS.
Yep.
And that's going to go up about 2.5 percentage points.
For
in
the
next-
forward 2
yeah.
years.
And the purpose of the graph there, that heat graph, is that this is for the green it's that heat graph that shows on the vertical the actual employer rates, and on the horizontal the rate increase for this next cycle. So that little red arrow there points to about where Washington County is in the scope of other similar state, local government organizations.
As provided by Milliman.
Yeah, by PERS. Any questions on that? Okay, next graph is, I want to give you some background on the PERS pickup and explain this a little bit more, which is part of the plan moving into the next budget cycle. So as you know, the county does not currently, the county currently picks up the employee 6% portion for only a small portion of the county. This was one of the items that has been identified as part of the overall retention and recruitment efforts, and is really a subcomponent of the class and comp study that HR is undergoing. It's a piece of that. So factoring into this year's budget will include that 6% pickup for all eligible employees.
Have
So-
we done that yet?
I want to underscore, just as we had talked about with CPI and COLA, these are scenarios that we're looking at. So the purpose of today's conversation is just what are scenarios or potential levers that could impact our economic forecast. So I just want to repeat that. These are just scenarios.
As a percentage, and I know you don't have all the data today, but what kind of percentage change would that be in payroll costs? Do you have any idea?
I don't. No, I don't right now.
We have that information and we can follow up because just as we look at scenarios for COLA, CPI, we've looked at scenarios.
Do you know what percentage of the folks we're not picking up? Percentage what?
No,
There's only a small number we are at this point.
The only employees that currently have 6% PERS pickup is WCPOA. So one bargaining. The sheriff's office.
So that means everybody else would be susceptible to that.
Yep.
so I can give you some ballpark numbers, but I didn't have that component of that payroll cost for WCPOA to back that out to get to the question that you're asking.
We'll get that to the
Yeah, we'll
board.
get that to you.
But it was also a
Next roundtable.
a negotiated item, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And we'll look back when that was placed in the WCPOA contract. We'll provide that to
Just want to remind it.
But just to echo what Ms. Angie's saying is that this is a part of the concept, and part of me being here is to explain what this potential impact could be. So the graphic on your right, it's always nice to be able to explain something in a picture, although you get several variables involved and it gets complicated. So I'll just walk through it. So right now on the left-hand side is FY26. The blue line going across horizontally is a hypothetical COLA. It's not a projection, it's just a number for the math to show how this works out. The COLA, the blue line that's in FY26, is the 2.9% that I just mentioned. If and this includes, this is just a percentage base, so there's no dollars attached to this, but it would, if the county moved to funding all of the 6% pickup, the difference between using COLA as part of that to fund that 6%, the county in the next year would need to pick up the other 3.1% to get to a 6%. So the scenario here is to use COLA to fund the PERS pickup until the COLA exceeded the PERS pickup. So the employees still receive all of the benefit of whatever the COLA would be, plus the difference between that COLA and the 6% in the first year. So in this case, that would be the yellow portion of the bar, the top portion of the bar that's underneath that broad 6% line that's running across the graph. So numbers wise, So essentially, the concept would be to use whatever the COLA is as a partial funding of the 6%, and then the county would pick up the difference until we got to the 6%. Does that make sense?
But technically, this is hypothetical, but the previous slide on COLA said 2.9, but as we know from last year, it could be 4.2. And then we still pick up the difference to make up the 6.
Exactly. So if we were,
Not as scary as it looks. you know.
no, so if we were projecting a 6% COLA,
Mhm.
then it would be a wash.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is a,
You're talking about monthly or the 10-year average?
He's talking about next year.
talk about next year.
Yeah, I know, but the 4.1 was what we used for that year versus as compared to the 10-year average, right? The 2.9 and the 3.1 on the previous page were the 10-year averages.
On slide 3
Yeah,
or slide 5 or 6, I mean, is that
the
the,
slide,
yeah.
you said that 3.1 and the 3.1 as shown in the graph is the orange, which is the 10-year average.
So the 3.1 is that August 24 where it intersects with the orange line.
Mhm.
And that's where the rolling average is sitting right now using,
12-month rolling average,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah, and using that trend forward, we're anticipating that number will be 2.9%
Yeah.
in December.
Again, you're assuming though that you have some control of those levers, but you have bargaining units who may not see it exactly the way you do.
Oh, yeah.
So we've got that lever to pull. Plus, quite frankly, in today's market, you start saying, I'm gonna give you a 1% increase. That thing, I don't have, I'll pick up your PERS, but I'm only give you 1%. You're gonna be immediately not competitive in the market, immediately. So I only point this out because it's not as easy as just saying, gee, we're gonna somehow average this out. We'll just take more of your COLA and we'll implement this. I think it's an additive. I don't think it's a takeaway.
Yeah, that's a good point. And this is, again, is a component of class and comp structure that will be, and the class and comp structure is going to take a couple of years for it to come to fruition and balance out. But this is a key piece of that.
So you've heard me in budget discussions wave the cautionary flag. I'm waving the cautionary flag again, and I want to link a couple slides. So the slide with the property tax revenue, which was slide 5, projecting a 4.25 increase. Then if you layer on what we know as of today for CPI or the 6% PERS pickup, then with other just general inflationary costs, we are in a stressed or strained situation. And that's not even talking about unfunded mandates or service needs that we need to address. So this is a cautionary flag, and we are in a position that we need to be competitive in the market to retain and attract employees. So all of those are truths and realities as we look at these the levers.
And I don't know that personally where I don't know that I agree with you about PERS pickup is a popular item. And I don't know that I agree with your comment that it would be seen as a
That's
takeaway.
fair, but I can tell you that working with a lot of public entities, you don't pick it up in today's market, you're not competitive.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm saying if you don't pick it up, you're not competitive.
You two are actually in agreement.
I think we're in
Same,
agreement.
same.
I think we are,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I finally understood.
I think the double negative is what.
Oh, okay, yeah. Just didn't agree.
And I finally understood the chart during all of that. So this scenario has us working on the 6% PERS pickup, but we aren't fully picking up the 6% and COLA until proposed fiscal year 28.
That's a scenario that's
Yes.
displayed on one chart. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just-
And I'm just trying
Got
to
it.
understand the
Got it.
chart in this
Got it.
scenario. Yes.
Yeah.
Got it. So, for example, under this first main bullet section, the fourth bullet down, brings county in alignment with other comparable government agencies by proposed fiscal year 28 asterisk.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't do it in this next proposed fiscal year. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I understand. And I appreciate getting scenarios.
Just one last point I want to make on here is for fiscal 26 and 27, this transition, the two yellow components of that bar, which would be the added cost to the county over that 2-year period, you could consider this a one-time cost. It to fund up to the 6% until the COLA bypass that is roughly $3 million. So just as a ballpark number to start with.
And that's roughly $3 million for, are you talking about a specific year?
For those 2 years,
Okay,
yeah,
Where did you get 3 million?
it's not on the graph here. It's
calculation.
a calculation. I just want to let you know.
Oh,
what that-
estimating.
that's just estimated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't turn my phones off.
Yeah, and we'll be bringing back further detail as we go through these fiscal focus, roundtables, to have a bit more clarity of what would be year one impacts, what would be future years, what would be general fund impact versus special fund impacts too.
So far, you're just giving us the pension part of it, not the health welfare benefit. Yeah.
Health insurance, yeah.
Yep.
So projection for next year is 10%, and that goes into effect. Remember that the health insurance cycle is on a calendar year basis versus we're on a fiscal year basis. So typically we have to make sure we look back and say what were the increases in the first half of the year versus the second half of the year. And in terms of this, the numbers are both 10%. So I think HR has done a really nice job, benefits Debbie and Lisa, in managing that down. It's any of the other, you look at other organizations and they're well over 10%.
So some of the steps put in place last year, the VIBA, the additional plan option, helped. I do want to give huge kudos to Lisa Takich and Debbie Watkins for negotiating. We started out at a high water mark of 23% increase with in health insurance, and to get that to 10% without any major plan design changes is a huge success. This is another area to watch. I'm also just going to connect that slide 5, a 4.25 increase in property tax to a 10% increase in health insurance. We still have a disconnect.
Kind of dollars.
I don't know.
We'll add that to the follow-up.
I have a question about this, under the bullet point of 6%, the last bullet point under that, obligation to bargain with unions, comma, could implement with non-representative staff. I'm not sure I follow.
So the concept is the 6%, but the
Okay.
question is how does that roll out? And we would have to bargain that with our labor groups, but the non-represented staff is non-represented, is the board's decision. So that could be rolled out with the non-reps. All right, other assumptions. So materials and services, that's also a major component of dollars that we spend. And what we do there typically is look at a 10-year trend. In previous years, that was a little more easy because the trend was pretty linear and easy. And one year kind of led to the next year. But as you all know, with what's happened the last few years with inflation, we have to take that into consideration when we're coming up with an estimate to increase those costs from year to year.
So it's 10 years too long?
It depends. It depends on the activity. If it's running at say 2 to 2.5% per year.
Well, I'm saying currently it's 10 years too long.
No, but you can't just rely on all 10 years. You have to look at some of these years that are outliers.
So what I'm wondering is for materials and services, and I may be mixing up categories. I think about construction costs for LUT capital, right? Steel, concrete, asphalt. And then there's everything else in terms of materials and services. That first category I described, I know from our capital budget, there's a lot of it. But out of our whole materials and services, I don't know. I'd love to know the percentages of my category A and category B. Because that may help. We may want to say, well, for category A, we only want to use out of a 10-year period, these most costly 5 years versus out of category B, use the 10-year. Because we continue to hear about supply chain problems, fossil fuels, steel problems, you know, trade and export, and category 1 just feels influenced by those things more.
Is it another way to say that, isn't it? Where does inflation hurt us the most? Is that,
Well, it's not just inflation.
well, it's where,
I mean, you
Where
are
do we
right,
see
it
the
boils
cost
down
increase?
to dollars and cents.
where does the cost increase?
Yes, absolutely.
So we'll bring that back when we come back with the general fund forecast next time.
Well,
I mean, I don't want to paint a doom and gloom picture here, but I would like to ask the questions now versus
Mhm.
find out later that the reality was more harsh than we assumed.
And what it does is it gives us a risk profile. And I think
Yeah.
that's what that's what I really would like to see.
No, at the ballpark, what you think percentage wise those might increase in your assumptions?
You know,
Performance over the last 3 years might be interesting to have.
yeah. So the easy answer would be using CPI, one of the CPI numbers moving forward, but that's just increase on existing activity. There's the utilization side, which is increase in activity. Those two factors play into it. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we'll provide some clarity, more clarity to that next time we see you. Okay, just a few other bullets. Frozen positions that are currently frozen will remain frozen. The transfer to the Housing Production Opportunity Fund, which has been traditionally in the past 4 million, will not be included in the base budget. That'll end up being a decision package. And contingencies and reserve budget per the policy the board adopted earlier this year will be included in the budget. So those contingency levels in the different budgets will be set according to that policy, with the exception of SIP. I'm going to talk more about SIP at the November, talk about the SIP policy and what that means there.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
I don't recall that you've hit your percentages on contingency. That was an aspirational goal, which I 100% agree. I give you A+ for doing it. But are you now saying you're fully going to fund those?
With the exception of SIP.
So that'll be that will change your budget.
Mhm.
Yeah, so you're going to drive it up. Okay.
Yeah.
And then can I add another assumption that's not there?
Sure.
It's one that I've talked about before, as you know, from your old school days, way back when. Most small governments would fund through a bonding issue, but others do through a CIP program. I give you again an A+ for getting a CIP program. But having a program and funding it are two different things. I don't see in your assumptions that you've made any provision to fund that CIP program. And is that something you're going to say? I mean, you need to say, I'm not going to, if you're not going to, or are you going to fund portions of your CIP program? Does that make sense?
Sure. So typically, as you roll into your capital budget from your CIP to your capital budget, you do fund it. It gets funded through the budget process. What we've landed on so far, which we don't have year 4, year 5 funding identified yet.
Right.
But as we get closer, we move towards either restructuring those capital needs or funding them as they get closer. And I think that's the purpose.
Typical.
Yeah, I think that's the purpose of the long-term CIP is identify where your funding gaps are.
You're identifying, but you're not funding. Is that an assumption that you're not going to fund that, or?
We identify it for the years 1, 2, and 3 and work towards the projections for years 4 and 5. So it's always a rolling. From
Well,
year to year.
I get all that, but you got a cliff coming up then, because if you're not gonna fund in years 1, 2, and 3, cliff starts in 4, 5, 6, 7. I won't be here, but I would think the board would want to know when that cliff is falling and what percentage that is, because I mean, you can't just say, hope I have money when I get there.
Well, actually, we are just in our second budget year of having a CIP, and this year 2 CIP is the first one where we've had the comprehensive list from the various departments. And this budget year, we're working towards including the facility condition index with a 5-year rolling addressing deferred maintenance. So we have a lot to figure out in the years ahead. It's not just a cliff because you don't manage a cliff that is a potential cliff out years 6 and 7. You manage towards your financial plan of years 1 through 3, being mindful of what's on the list for years 4 and 5 again. And we're doing way better than boards prior to 2019.
I'm still giving you credit for having a CIP program, but I have not heard, even with those comments of doing the rolling and looking at it, any funding going to any CIP. If you're telling me you are, then fine, just say you are. But I haven't seen the budget and I haven't heard it in anything that there's
Well,
any funding.
I tell you, by contrast, I'm really pleased because we now have this, whereas
You have a list.
no, we have a CIP.
You have a list. Where's the funding? Where's the funding?
We have identified the funding in our current fiscal year with the trends for years 1 and 3.
You've identified what you're gonna need. Where's the funding set aside to do it?
We are talking past one another. We are light years ahead of where you participated as a board member for 30 years. So this conversation between the two of you isn't getting us further.
Well, I think you missed what you're saying, with all due respect, doesn't make any sense, because if you don't fund it, you don't fund it. All I'm saying is you say you don't fund it.
So
Are you funding it? You're not funding it.
So as part of our work plan and supporting your strategic plan update is connecting the facility condition index, which was presented to the board, to the CIP. So what I am hearing out of this conversation is clarity in a bullet point that we are going to work on that. And there may be funds that need to be further addressed within this year's operating budget to address some of our facility needs. But this is work we're going to based on the facility condition index. So Commissioner Rogers will work on adding a bullet point to clarify for where we are in that process in the next presentation on the economic forecast.
Great.
And I think the work we do on the CIP is real similar to what we'll do with the general fund and the forecast. The forecast, as Ms. Angie and we've talked about a bunch of times, we have a revenue curve that doesn't match our expenditure curves. And if you run that out 5 years or 10 years, those lines diverge. They go the wrong way. And so every year we're moving towards resolving that as we move forward. But as long as we have those two different rates applying to our revenue and expenditures, we're going to have that happen. So, but I hear what you're saying. I appreciate that. All right. The last 2 pages is the calendar. I couldn't get it to fit on one where you could actually read it, so I had to break it up into 2. And the items that are highlighted in orange are the board's touch points. So It doesn't have today on the calendar, but it has the next couple of roundtable meetings. You can see there 11/7, 12/5, and 1/9, 2025. And then we move into the next page. And these dates are very similar to what we've had this year, this last budget cycle. So we have a budget committee orientation mid-April, then the kickoff of the budget committee meeting with all the budget committees coming together at the end of April, and the following budget committee meeting days to review the budget in mid to late May with adoption in June.
Are these two slides the same as the version we had yesterday?
Mhm.
Okay.
The one change I want to refer to you on the slide that's up is the May 14, 15, and 19. So this is responsive to feedback that we heard from you. The time period between the 15th and 19th will allow you to review and staff to prepare the Q&A for your review, because last year it was crunched. The date of the public hearing for the budget committee, you received live time, the Q&A updates to you, and that there wasn't enough review time.
But it's not going to be acceptable if we show up on the 19th and are given the Q&A for the first time.
Absolutely. So this allows review time for you and also staff to be able to create the content for you. There just was not enough time for both things to be true.
So I look forward to a calendar that makes it clear what day we're going to get the answers. Yeah,
We can add that in an updated version.
yeah. That'd be great. And don't count on me reading it over the weekend, please.
That's all I have. Any questions?
We have, yeah, okay. Questions? Thoughts?
We're going to provide some of this information to the mayors, I'm assuming, based on their requests the other day.
This is all public.
I did have one more thought, Greg. As this board goes through and trying to determine their best scenarios, because I mean, you got revenue that could decrease more than you said. You got a number of expenditure items, material services, you don't know exactly what it is, you don't know what PERS will exactly come out, and some of your salary increases. And if you, my favorite one is on the SIP, if you're gonna fund any, I mean, on the CFP fund it. Are you going to provide some levers that they all can make decisions? So it's interactive, so it's just not you saying, well, this is what happened. So if they said, well, if I make this decision, it'll skew in this way if I make that decision. So that they're really the ones that are driving policy.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And using the financial forecasting model we have for the general fund, we have those ability to tweak and see what happens with the lines. So we already have that built in. The levers are there. And as we move forward, I would assume that we would use that more as a tool to help explain the impacts of some of these and help make decisions moving forward. Exactly.
But they're interactive enough that they all could use them. So if they could say, well, if we do this, or if that.
Who's the they again?
Or plus Jason when he gets here in January.
Yeah, if you're asking if they could sit down at a spreadsheet and plug it in, I would probably
I'm not saying grind numbers. I'm just saying if
understanding the hydraulics.
percentage, just the hydraulics of
Yeah.
percentage is changing.
Yeah.
Because they're big policy decisions.
It is, yeah. Yeah, and we're striving towards being able to provide that information so that there's a clear understanding between moving pieces around and what the end impact is. Yeah.
Just suggest.
Well, I think part of what the percentage, you asked some really good questions about percentages and categories. I think that will help us see the effects of certain levers,
Well,
particularly since Greg articulated earlier that professional services is greater than half of the budget. And when you pull out the transfers, it's greater than 3/4 of the budget. So having what percentage of healthcare costs is personal services, just by one example,
Yeah,
will
Good example.
help us. And we can instrument that for ourselves in our own way of thinking. I would like to share a bunch of thoughts, because as it goes towards, if you project slide 3. So working the board with staff for the 4 critical facilities, we had an estimate of $65.7 million for the 4 critical facilities. We have now approved all 4 contracts for a total of $53.4 million. I'll round up to 54. If we take the 65.7 and the 54, that means there's 11.5, 11.7 still in flux. It may be used relative, we have contracts, but there's contingencies and actuals and whatnot. But what's important is that we have direction from this board that will be using future years of SIP and gain share to cover the gap for the critical facilities and the ERP purchase of 42 million. And thus far, once again, if I round up, we have 30 million of that 42 that we're counting on using. So we have to decide at what point might those one-time funds be used for purposes other than addressing those prior 2-year gaps. Just looking for a little good news here, folks. Remember, turn the clock back to October 2022. Then we had 34 million of critical facilities. It grew to 67.7. And we knew we needed an ERP, but we didn't know the form of that. Now we know. I think it was 19.7 million. So we're doing pretty darn well.
I agree. And when I look back and see what we have accomplished, there are check boxes in a lot of places, and we have been funding some of our CIP recognized issues. So to Roy's point earlier, I think we have to look over our shoulder as well as looking forward. So I just want to get that out on the table too.
Yep. Then I have a few thoughts towards proposed FY26. We do have the preliminary facility condition index assessment. So from my standpoint, there are a lot of liabilities with no funding plan, which is where we've been. I'm assuming, right, so this goes into that all these assumptions. I'm assuming that proposed FY26 and proposed FY27 is where the CIP and the budget timeframes by which we'll be sorting out policies towards addressing that facility condition index asset pool.
Yes, scheduled on your rolling agenda. The next touch point on that is November 12th.
Yep.
To come back to your board.
Yep. I also sat back and reflected upon how the facilities asset pool has grown since tenure of January 2019. And if I think about it just from things we own, whether we've acquired, made changes, built, there's the Sheriff's Office Training Center, the Blanton Street building, and we've changed the uses of that multiple times. I'm not sure if we've comprehended that in terms of op support out of our facility team. The Adams and Main Street property's been acquired. I haven't a clue what that property's being used for. The Bridge Shelter Hillsborough, Heartwood Commons, Westside Commons Event Center. The 2 CAT facilities will be opening in 2025, so we know they have to be maintained. And then in my list, I know there's been some additional Hawk buildings. And then I thought about leased office space, right? The elections office is leased office space. I think we have a King City WIC office that we went to an opening. I was reminded that we have lease space for the veterans and IDD over in the Hawthorne building. So I really wonder, Ms. Angie, have you already done or will you be doing a facilities team org assessment to support the portfolio that has changed? That's an open question. I'm not.
I have an answer. So actually Ann Ober and Laurel Brown are actively working on that. Our facilities maintenance grounds crew has not kept up with our new assets. And so this is similar to our conversation on CIP. As we look at our capital, what's the footprint, the totality of footprint that we need to increase to support the facility? Let's use CAT as an example. HHS and facilities had lots of conversation. What is going to be that maintenance agreement? How are we going to maintain the facility so that there's a good understanding, so it works both for the operations, also for our internal services. We need to have that one Washington County approach as we move forward with all facilities. It's very easy to get focused on what are the direct services we are delivering to the community, but we can't forget about that internal support, or in this case, facilities that actually make the facilities run on a day-to-day basis.
Then on top of my category of facility asset pool growth, we know out into the future, we're working on an expanded jail community corrections solution and then planning a new courthouse. But I don't expect we're in the planning or securing the money for planning. So those are further out. So really, when I think about this schedule, knowing that we're trying to provide direction between now and January so that staff has the time to work with Ms. Angie on developing that proposed budget that we'll see in April, no later than the end of April, or I'll turn some new shade of gray. I have been pondering what don't I know? And that part of it was what I just shared with all of you. But I'm also starting to think about the whole portfolio, and I don't know quite how to put this yet, but between today and that January 9th, I'm going to be asking myself, what don't I know? What don't I feel grounded in as the major levers affecting each of these portfolio asset areas? And everybody's tired of hearing me asking for a summary of what's the effect of state mandated service, and then match up the mandated versus enabled compared to what the state provides us with funding. So it's going to be more, if I use an analogy, I'm not just going to be a bird sitting here with my mouth open, feeding me information. I'm going to continue to be my critical thinking self, wondering to make sure that I've done a decent enough job in terms of articulating direction, sharing that articulation with my colleagues, and seeing if in the end that needs, or if we as a group need to document any assumptions, for example. So that January date feels awfully drop dead to me. So, am I making any sense? Eyes wide open.
And as we go through this process, I guess what I've learned now over the past 6 years is not only where are we this year, but how our decisions, I'm reflecting on our frozen open positions, things like that. How does that affect us out into not the long-term future, but near-term future? And what are we doing today that has impact there, and what prices will we pay down the road?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important piece for us to be looking at as well. In these critical years, I think we have to be very cognizant of what we're doing and what impact it has into the future.
Yep. Thank you. I appreciate hearing that. Yep.
Well, staff appreciates this board's leadership. I appreciate, sometimes we don't always, as staff, reflect on just the successes that we've had. We're focused and what do we need to do moving forward? And we have done good work. I think that what I'm hearing today is this timeline is good, and wanting to have specificity. I can't talk. Thank you. Need a bit more water. Because your board we've been on this budget journey for several years, and you heard me last year say we're at bone. And so because this board has such a good understanding of this budget, knows that there will need to be hard decisions, and that impacts services. And we have to not do that from a short-sighted view, but what's the long-term impact from a fiscal sustainability lens?
I'm also wondering, could we switch to the calendar? When do we know who is on the budget committee for the proposed FY26 budget?
Yeah, that process starts usually right after the first of the year. And we would know by March.
Yeah, we'll add that in the second update of the calendar, just as Chair, you had requested when you will receive the budget committee Q&As.
So I think if you go back one slide, no, this is the first time I'm through the roundtable packet that we're seeing the calendar. So it seems to me like February is just like we did this past February. We'll be able to document assumptions and the budget direction from the board and push that out as you have with budget info sessions, both inside and outside. I think we should consider including our budget committee members, having a communication from the board to our budget committee members. And then if we appoint new ones, resend that to them so that they have insight as to what direction we've provided, so that when we meet, that'll give them a chance to come in with some questions about how are we supposed to understand what that direction was? And then when we all get the budget and it's presented to us on the 28th, we can potentially have a Q&A there. So at least as a budget, as a full set of budget committees, we will have the chance to understand how Ms. Angie took that direction and delivered the proposed budget to us. Does that make sense?
It does, and contrary to what we may have heard from our mayors last week, I think our budget team
Committee,
members
yeah.
are real, they do read the budget book. They are engaged. We had several that were had very good questions and pointed out things that I hadn't thought of. And so I really want to encourage that because I think it provides value to us beyond what we know. So I'm fully in support of that, of including them early on.
So if it's helpful, actually might be some budget committee members watching this morning.
Oh,
Yeah. So
thank you.
yeah, so I think I'm on the same path as what you're talking about here, and that's to the extent is to bring the budget committee members along this journey before we even build the budget, so that when we get to the April timeframe, there's good conversations and they're fully educated. So they know about the upcoming roundtables. They have links to be able to go in and watch those. They have and there's as we go through the budget process, I'm always reaching out and keeping them included.
Thank you for doing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And I'll have one-on-ones where they'll stop in, they'll have questions about certain budget components of the budget book or things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was disheartening to hear a really negative gross generalization about our budget committee members. So, all righty.
I have a question.
Yeah,
There.
now's the time.
Okay. It's just a process question. But I do want to first express my gratitude to you. This was a really well done presentation. Thank you for presenting. I think, like I'm gonna borrow Chair Harrington's framing and say, we're going in wide eyes open with this budget. And I really appreciate the information. We're getting more clear on how we do this budgeting. So thank you. I have a process question of when the board will get the material so that we have enough time to read.
Next slide.
The budget presentation is the 28th. And then the printed budget summary books is distributed. So I thought
Same day.
I thought we agreed like 2 weeks in advance so that the board has 2 weeks before we come to the first meeting.
So the first budget committee meeting is just the county administrator's presentation of the budget message. And the CFO may add information like what is new in the budget document, to like the readability piece of the budget. There is no further presentations at that meeting. You then have a 2-week period between April 28th and May 14th. So that's your 2-week study period.
So I printed out for myself a 2025 calendar. So the budget is available on Monday, the 28th. Our first, that's through a budget committee meeting. The next budget committee meeting is the 14th. So that's approximately 2.5 weeks. And so then the 15th is the Thursday. And this is where we're having the discussion around when that fourth date is. Is it the 19th or potentially the 21st based upon our having time with the full answer set?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was counting the meeting. Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you, Chair Harrington. And thank you, Tanya. Counting the first meeting to be the first meeting. This is very clear for me. Thank you.
Anything else on budget?
Are-
Okay,
Are we gonna resend the calendar? Cause I did print. I like the calendar slides. Are you gonna update and then resend it, or should we just, is the board gonna get it, or should we rely on the website? The
We
updated.
can certainly send it, and I can actually send it in a format
it
that's
is
one page.
possible to print both pages, both slides on one page, if that's what you're asking for.
Yeah, the updated version. Yeah, I have these two printed separately, but
We
I'm
will get.
wondering about the updated version and how I get the
We,
updated.
we will get the board an
Oh.
updated version.
Rely on the website, or?
Internally, we will email that to your board. We
Okay.
will also include that in your next roundtable packet. In addition to that, internally, we are working with our departments right now to also verify, does this timeline work for them? One of the outcomes of the Marina assessment that we talked about at your last roundtable is we need to land as a full Washington County on commitment to these timelines, because when one timeline moves, it impacts another timeline. So
Yeah.
once we get that finalized, we will send your board and then also include it in the next roundtable. So it's publicly available.
Okay, I think that's it on budget. So we will close for our lunch break and pick back up at 1 p.m. Great. Thank you.